The tires of my old pickup crunched over gravel as I pulled into the clearing by the Kenai River. I turned off the engine, and for a moment the silence hit me like a wall. No sounds of cars or people, just the gentle rush of water and the occasional caw of a distant raven. This was why I came here. No distractions, no noise, just me, the river, and the promise of a good catch. I stepped out of the truck and stretched, feeling the ache in my back from the long drive. The air was crisp and sharp, biting at my lungs with each breath. A faint mist clung to the treetops, the morning sunlight piercing through in golden streaks. Perfect, I muttered to myself, grabbing my gear from the back of the truck. The Kenai River had been my escape for years, a place where I could forget about deadlines and bills. My wife used to joke that I spent more time with the fish than I did with her. But now, with her gone, the river was all I had. I slung my pack over my shoulder, grabbed my fishing rod and headed toward the water. The trail was familiar, worn by my boots over countless trips, yet it always felt like the first time. Each bend in the path revealed something new. A fallen tree, a patch of wildflowers, the sparkling ribbon of the river winding its way through the wilderness. Reaching the riverbank, I set my pack down and began unpacking my gear. Rod, tackle, box flies, and a thermos of coffee. I had everything I needed. I poured myself a cup and took a long sip, savoring the warmth as it spread through me. "This is the life," I said, grinning to no one in particular. The river was alive with the sounds of nature. Water splashed over rocks, and the occasional trout broke the surface with a quiet plop. In the distance, the forest buzzed with the chatter of unseen birds. Yet, there was something off, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I stood, still listening. It wasn't an absence of sound, more like a shift. The usual background hum of the wilderness seemed muted, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. "You're just being paranoid," I muttered, shaking my head. I focused on tying a fly, my fingers working the line with practiced ease. But the unease lingered, gnawing at the edge of my thoughts. As I cast my line into the water, I tried to shake the feeling. The fly landed with a soft splash, and I began to reel it in slowly, mimicking the movements of a real insect. Minutes passed, then an hour. The rhythm of casting and reeling soothed me, but that nagging sensation remained, like a splinter in my mind. "Come on, Jack," I said aloud, trying to lighten the mood. "You've been out here 100 times. Nothing's out there but trees and fish." Still, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than usual, my eyes scanning the dense forest behind me. The trees stood tall and imposing, their shadows stretching long in the morning light. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks. A sudden crack of a branch snapped me to attention. My heart leapt into my throat as I spun around, gripping my fishing rod like a weapon. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding small against the vastness of the wilderness. Silence. I waited, every muscle in my body tense. The only sound was the rush of the river. Slowly, I lowered the rod and let out a shaky breath. Probably just a squirrel, I thought, though the rationalization did little to calm my nerves. I turned back to the river, forcing myself to focus on the water. It was ridiculous to let my mind run wild like this. Still, as I cast my line again, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. "Relax," I muttered, trying to reassure myself. "You're being stupid." The breeze picked up, rustling the leaves overhead, and for a moment I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something wasn't right. The thought came unbidden, but it stuck, refusing to be dismissed. My hands were trembling slightly as I reeled in the line. I didn't want to admit it, but the thought of packing up and leaving crossed my mind. Another sound, a low, guttural noise, echoed through the trees. My blood turned to ice. "Okay. Now that was definitely not a squirrel," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. I scanned the tree line again, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Then, for a brief moment, I saw it, a flash of movement, something large and dark. It disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me frozen in place. "Shit," I breathed, my pulse racing. "Stay calm, just stay calm." I grabbed my pack and began hastily shoving my gear inside. Whatever was out there, I wasn't sticking around to find out. Another crack, closer this time, sent a jolt of fear through me. I slung the pack over my shoulder and started up the trail, my boots crunching loudly on the gravel. Every step felt like a lifetime, my ears straining for any sound behind me. When I finally reached the truck, I tossed my gear into the back and climbed in, my hands fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I wasted no time peeling out of the clearing, the tires kicking up a cloud of dust. As the forest blurred past, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw something moving between the trees, but it was gone before I could be sure. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, the dense forest giving way to open roads. Only then did I let myself breathe, my hands still gripping the wheel tightly. Whatever had been out there, it was a reminder that the wilderness was as dangerous as it was beautiful. The soft gurgle of the Kenai River filled the air as I stood at its edge, the fishing rod held loosely in my hands. The sun had risen higher, now casting a warm glow over the water, but the unease from earlier hadn't left me. I told myself to focus, to let the rhythmic flow of the river calm me, but my nerves were frayed, and the quiet didn't feel like the usual tranquility I cherished. It felt wrong. I adjusted my stance, letting the rod's tip dip into the current. The fly skimmed the water, a perfect replica of the insects that hovered nearby. Normally I would be fully absorbed in the process, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Probably just tired, I muttered under my breath, trying to rationalize the tension coiling in my gut. As I cast again, I scanned the far bank. The thick forest stretched endlessly, shadows playing tricks on my eyes. The water sparkled, but beyond it, the trees stood like sentinels, their tops swaying gently in the breeze. Then I heard it, a faint rustling sound, barely noticeable over the river's murmur. I froze, my grip on the rod tightening. "Hello?" I called out, my voice carried away by the wind. Nothing. I shook my head, laughing nervously to myself. "You're losing it, Jack. Pull it together." I reeled in the line and cast again, the fly landing with a soft plop. Minutes passed, the world seemingly returning to its usual rhythm. My breathing slowed, and I started to relax, telling myself I was just on edge for no reason. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed from the woods behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, and stared. Into the dense trees. The sound had been too sharp, too deliberate. I took a step back, my boots slipping slightly on the wet rocks. "Anyone out there?" I called, louder this time. The silence that followed was deafening. The birds had stopped their chatter, and even the river seemed quieter. I clenched my jaw, scanning the shadows for movement. My fingers instinctively tightened around the fishing rod, not that it would do me any good if something decided to come charging out of the trees. Then, from somewhere deeper in the woods, came a low, guttural grunt. A chill ran down my spine. I'd heard that sound before, back when I was a kid camping with my dad in Yellowstone. It was the unmistakable vocalization of a grizzly bear. "Shit," I whispered, my mouth suddenly dry. I knew what to do, or at least I thought I did. Slowly, I lowered the fishing rod and began inching toward my pack, which was resting a few feet away on the riverbank. Every step felt like it. Took an eternity, my boots crunching softly against the gravel. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself, "no sudden moves." Reaching my pack, I crouched down and grabbed my bear spray, my hands trembling as I fumbled to unclip the safety. My mind raced through the steps my dad had drilled into me during those camping trips. Make yourself big. Don't run. Use the spray if it gets too close. Another grunt, closer this time, sent a fresh wave of fear coursing through me. I rose slowly, clutching the bear spray like a lifeline. My eyes scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of movement, and then I saw it. A massive shape emerged from the shadows, its fur a dark, mottled brown that blended seamlessly with the forest. The grizzly's sheer size was staggering, its broad shoulders swaying as it lumbered toward the riverbank. Its nose twitched as it sniffed the air, its small dark eyes locking onto me. "Easy, big guy," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm not here to bother you." The bear paused, its head tilting slightly, as if considering my presence. For a moment, I thought it might lose interest and wander off, but then it took another step closer, its massive paws crunching the underbrush. My heart hammered in my chest as I began to back away, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. The river was at my back, the frigid water lapping at my boots. There was nowhere to go, no safe place to retreat. "Come on, buddy," I murmured. "Just turn around, you don't want any trouble, and neither do I." The bear let out a low huff, its breath visible in the cool morning air. It took another step forward, closing the gap between us. My fingers tightened around the bear spray, my thumb hovering over the trigger. Suddenly the bear rose onto its hind legs, towering over me like a living nightmare. Its deep, rumbling growl vibrated through the air, sending every instinct in, my body screaming for me to run. But I couldn't. "Stay back," I yelled, raising the bear spray. My voice cracked, but it didn't matter. I needed to do something to break the standoff. The bear dropped back down onto all fours with a heavy thud, its eyes never leaving mine. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the bear turned and lumbered back into the trees, its massive form disappearing into the shadows. I stood there frozen, the can of bear spray still clutched tightly in my hand. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps as I tried to process what had just happened. Finally, my legs gave out, and I sank to the ground, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. "Holy shit," I whispered, staring at the spot where the bear had vanished. That was too close. The adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I knew I couldn't stay here, not now. I needed to pack up and get out before the bear decided to come back. As I gathered my gear, my mind raced with thoughts of what could have happened. I'd been lucky. Damn lucky. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip had been a mistake, that I'd underestimated the raw, unpredictable power of the wilderness. By the time I reached my truck, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, its warmth doing little to chase away the lingering chill in my bones. I tossed my gear into the back and climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. As I started the engine and pulled away, I glanced one last time at the forest. The river and trees seemed peaceful again, but I knew better now. This wasn't my domain. It was the bear's. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I made my way along the riverbank, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. I'd moved downstream, hoping to find a better spot to fish, but my nerves were still raw from the encounter earlier. The grizzly hadn't followed, but its presence lingered like a shadow in the back of my mind. "You're fine," I muttered, to myself, gripping my fishing rod tightly. "It's gone, you're fine." The river curved sharply here, creating a deep pool where fish often gathered. It should have been the perfect place to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of casting and reeling, but the tension in my chest refused to ease. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my pulse racing. As I prepared to cast my line, a sharp movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. I turned my head slowly, eyes narrowing as I scanned the opposite bank. The sunlight played tricks on the water, but there, just beyond the dense thicket, something moved, a dark shape, low to the ground. My stomach tightened. It could have been a deer, maybe a moose, but I wasn't taking any chances. I stood still, barely breathing, watching the spot where I'd seen the movement. A long moment passed, then another, and nothing happened. "Probably just my imagination," I whispered, though the words felt hollow. I cast my line, the fly landing softly on the water. The ripples spread outward, but my focus remained, fixed on the far bank. My instincts screamed that I wasn't alone, but I forced myself to keep fishing, the mechanical motion of reeling in the line grounding me. Another snap, this time closer. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. The noise had come from the woods behind me, the dense foliage shifting slightly, as if something large had brushed against it. "Who's there?" I called, my voice loud and firm. The only response was the distant rush of the river. Gripping the rod like a club, I took a tentative step forward, straining to see through the shadows. "Hello?" I tried again, the word catching in my throat, and then I saw it, just a glimpse, but enough to send a jolt of fear through me. A massive fur-covered flank disappearing into the trees. "Damn it!" I hissed, taking a shaky step back. "It's back!" The grizzly hadn't left the area after all. It was still here, watching me, tracking me. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind, but I knew I had to stay calm. Running wasn't an option. It would only trigger the bear's predatory instincts. I reached for the bear spray clipped to my belt, my fingers fumbling with the safety cap. Another rustling sound came from deeper in the woods, followed by a low guttural noise, a sound that made my blood run cold. "Nope, I'm done," I muttered, my voice trembling. "This isn't worth it." I slowly began to back away, keeping my eyes on the tree line. My mind raced, recalling everything I knew about bear encounters. Don't turn your back, make yourself look big, speak firmly and calmly. "Hey, bear," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "I'm just passing through, no trouble here." The underbrush shifted again, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought the bear might charge. My grip on the bear spray tightened, my thumb hovering over the trigger. Then silence. The woods seemed to hold their breath, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. I took another step back, then another, the gravel crunching loudly beneath my boots. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the riverbank. I turned slightly, just enough to glance over my shoulder and orient myself toward the path leading back to my truck. That's when I heard the splash. Whipping my head around, I saw the grizzly wading into the river, its massive body cutting through the water with ease. It wasn't charging, not yet, but it was heading in my direction, its eyes locked onto me like a predator sizing up its prey. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, the words barely audible over the pounding of my heart. I raised the bear spray, aiming it squarely at the advancing bear. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice echoing off the surrounding trees. "I mean it." The grizzly paused mid-step, water dripping from its fur. For a moment, I thought the spray might actually deter it, but then it let out a deep rumbling growl that shook me to my core. "Nope, nope, nope," I said under my breath, retreating further along the riverbank. The bear didn't follow. Instead, it stood there in the shallows, watching me with an almost curious intensity. Its ears flicked back, and for a fleeting second, I thought it might lose interest. Then it let out a loud huff, turned, and lumbered back toward the opposite bank. I stood there frozen, the can of bear spray still raised. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps, my chest heaving as the adrenaline coursed through me. When the bear disappeared into the woods, I finally lowered the spray, my arms shaking from the tension. "That's it," I muttered, my voice hoarse. "I'm done, no more fishing trips for a while." I gathered my gear as quickly as I could, my hands trembling with every movement. Slinging my pack over my shoulder, I started back up the trail, my eyes darting constantly between the trees. Every sound, every shadow, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. By the time I reached my truck, the sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the clearing. I tossed my gear into the bed and climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me. As I started the engine and pulled away, I glanced one last time at the river. The water shimmered in the fading light, peaceful and serene, but I knew better now. The wilderness had shown its teeth, and I wasn't about to tempt fate again. The road to the ranger station seemed longer than it should have. The truck rumbled over the uneven gravel as I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something large following me, though I knew it was just my nerves playing tricks. The encounter with the bear had shaken me more than I cared to admit, but I had managed to make it to my truck, and now all I wanted was to put as much distance between myself and the river as possible. As I drove, I tried to focus on something other than the haunting image of those dark eyes watching me. The sky had clouded over, and a heavy mist began to settle over the landscape. The trees blurred together in the grey light, and the air felt thick with tension. I shook my head, trying to push away the anxiety building in my chest. Just get to the station. Everything will be fine. The ranger station wasn't far from the river, and I knew there would be a couple of officers there who could help me make sense of what had happened. They'd dealt with bear encounters before, and maybe they could offer some reassurance, maybe even tell me it was just a typical run-in with a grizzly. I parked the truck in front of the station, its small wooden building standing out against the dark forest behind it. I sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts before grabbing my pack and heading inside. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped in. The warmth of the building hit me, a stark contrast to the cool air outside. Inside, a ranger with a thick beard sat behind the counter, reading something on a clipboard. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to report a bear sighting. Well, more than just a sighting." The ranger looked up, his expression unreadable. "Bear sighting, huh? Where did you see it?" "Just outside the river, a little past the first bend." "Grizzly, big one," I said, sitting on the bench opposite him. "I was fishing, and it came right up on me." The ranger nodded, setting the clipboard down. "We get reports of grizzlies in the area, but it's not common for them to approach people unless they're hungry or threatened. Did you do anything to provoke it?" I hesitated for a moment. "I didn't think so. I kept my distance, didn't make any sudden moves, but it came close. I thought it was going to charge." "Did it show any signs of aggression? Growling, huffing?" he asked, his tone professional. "Yeah, it growled at me when I backed off, but it didn't charge. Just kind of watched me for a while," I said, replaying the encounter in my mind. "Then it left after a few minutes." The ranger sat up straighter. "That's strange. Usually bears are more skittish around people. If it was lingering like that, it might have been too comfortable with human scent. You say it didn't attack?" "No, but it bit me," I replied, rolling up my pant leg to reveal the still healing puncture marks on my calf. "It came at me and I tripped, got my leg. But then it just backed off." The ranger's brow furrowed. "A bite serious, especially from a grizzly. Did you seek medical attention?" "Yeah, I went to Anchorage. They treated it, gave me some antibiotics," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "But that's not the point. It was too close. I don't feel safe going back there." "Is that normal for a bear to act like that?" The ranger leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the counter thoughtfully. "It's not unheard of, but it's unusual. Grizzlies are usually more cautious around humans. Something about that bear doesn't sit right. You said it wasn't acting aggressively at first?" "Right. It just came out of the woods, sniffing the air. Like it was curious," I said, leaning forward. "It didn't seem afraid of me at all." "Could have been sick," the ranger muttered. "Bears in this area are known to be a bit unpredictable. Maybe it's scavenging for food, or maybe it's got a territory it's protecting. Either way, if you see it again, don't try to approach or scare it off. Just leave the area." "Right, I get that. I don't know if I want to go back there at all," I admitted. "That close to something like that, I felt helpless, like I was just waiting for it to pounce." The ranger nodded slowly, his expression softening. "I get it. I've had a few close calls myself. But you did the right thing by not panicking. The bear could have reacted a lot worse, but it didn't. That's a good sign." I sighed, still not feeling much better, but I appreciated his attempt to reassure me. "So what happens now? Is this something I need to report to the authorities?" The ranger shrugged. "We get these kinds of reports from time to time. You're not the first and you won't be the last. We'll log it in the system. But there's not much we can do unless it becomes a recurring problem. I'd recommend you stay clear of that area for a while, though. Maybe find a different spot to fish for the time being." I thought about it for a moment. The thought of going back to that stretch of the river made my stomach turn. The grizzly had been too close, its presence too real. But I also didn't want to let one bad encounter ruin my love for fishing in these woods. "I guess I'll have to think about that," I said, finally standing up. "Thanks for the help." The ranger nodded as I turned to leave. "Stay safe out there, Jack, and if you see that bear again, don't hesitate to report it. If it's getting too comfortable near humans, we may need to track it." I nodded and walked back to my truck. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I could still feel the bear's eyes on me, like they were burned into my mind. The thought of returning to the river made me uneasy, but I knew it wasn't just the bear I was avoiding. It was the feeling of vulnerability that had settled deep within me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure if I could just walk into the wilderness and leave everything behind. The danger was real. The bear had been real. And I wasn't so sure that I was ready to face it again. The sound of gravel crunching beneath my tires had become a constant companion since I left the ranger station. It was still early in the morning, but I could feel the weight of the day settling on my shoulders. The conversation with the ranger had done little to calm my nerves. He'd been helpful, but the unease that clung to me was far from gone. I kept telling myself it had just been a freak encounter, something that happened to a lot of people. The bear was likely just curious, maybe a little territorial, but that didn't explain the way it had lingered, how it had looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed that day. I was no longer just another person in the woods, I was a potential target. As I drove, I found myself heading back toward the Kenai River. It didn't make sense, not after everything that had happened. But I kept thinking about the days I'd spent there, how the water always brought me peace. I needed to reclaim that. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't scared of this place. I parked the truck farther down the road, where I knew the bear wouldn't have been. The ranger had suggested I avoid the spot near the first bend, but there were plenty of other places along the river that I could fish. I wasn't going to let one close call drive me away from the only place that made sense anymore. The air was still crisp as I grabbed my pack and headed toward the water. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees in the distance, and the sky had darkened with clouds. A storm might be coming, but it didn't matter. I needed to focus on something else. I set up by a smaller section of the river, farther from the spot where the grizzly had appeared. My hands moved automatically as I unpacked my gear. The rhythm of fishing was supposed to ground me, to ease the tension that had built up since the attack. But with each cast, my eyes kept darting toward the trees, scanning the shadows. Every sound, every rustle of leaves made my heart skip a beat. "I'm being stupid," I muttered to myself, casting the line out. "It's just a damn bear." But it wasn't just a bear. It was a force of nature, something wild and unpredictable. I couldn't stop thinking about how it had approached me, how it hadn't shown any fear or hesitation. It had been as if it knew exactly what it was doing, and that thought terrified me more than anything. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one dragging on longer than the last. I tried to focus on the water, but my mind kept wandering back to that encounter. The bear had been close enough to touch. It could have killed me if it had wanted to. That realization was like a cold fist in my chest. A branch snapped behind me. I froze. The sound was louder this time, not distant like before. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the woods behind me. The wind was picking up, the trees swaying, but there was something in the way the branches moved that didn't feel right. Something was out there, watching. I swallowed, hard, my grip tightening on the fishing rod. The breeze had stopped. The forest had fallen into an unnatural silence. I could hear the thumping of my own heartbeat, feel it pounding in my ears. Another snap. I took a step back, my feet sliding on the rocks by the riverbank. This was no squirrel or deer. This was something much larger, something that belonged in the wilderness, not the world I knew. I turned toward the trees, my stomach twisting in knots. My mind raced, my thoughts scattered. The bear? Could it be the same? It had to be. This was the same stretch of river, the same place. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." No answer. The rustling grew louder, closer. I could hear something breathing, deep and slow, as though it was waiting for something. For me. I could feel its presence, even though I couldn't see it. Then, without warning, it appeared. The grizzly. It stepped into the clearing, massive and terrifying, its fur bristling in the wind. Its dark eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment neither of us moved. It was as if time itself had paused, suspended between us. I could hear my breath catch in my throat. The bear didn't charge at first. It just stood there, sizing me up, as though it had all the time in the world. "You stay back," I said, my voice trembling. It was more a plea than a command. The bear snorted, its nostrils flaring as it took a step closer. Its massive body rippled with muscle beneath the thick fur, and its claws scraped against the dirt. The air smelled of earth and sweat, and I could feel the fear rising in my chest. I reached for the bear spray, my fingers fumbling as I tried to unclip the safety. My mind screamed for me to run, to get away, but the river was behind me, the truck miles down the trail. There was nowhere to go. The bear had already closed the distance between us. It growled low, deep in its chest. A warning. I was too close, now too vulnerable. My legs shook as I tried to back away, my feet slipping on the slick rocks. The bear took another step, and then, without any more warning, it lunged. I barely had time to react. The world exploded into chaos as the grizzly charged, its jaws snapping and claws slashing. My instincts kicked in, and I threw my hands up to protect my face, but its weight was too much. The air was filled with the sound of its growl, the earth trembling beneath its feet. I stumbled backward, tripping on the rocks, and the bear's massive jaws clamped onto my leg. Pain exploded through me, white-hot and unbearable, as I screamed out, the sound echoing across the river. I tried to kick, to break free, but the bear's grip was ironclad. It dragged me along the bank for a moment, the force of the attack knocking the breath out of me. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. All I could feel was the pain, the sharpness of its teeth sinking deeper into my flesh. Then, just as quickly as it had attacked, the bear released me. It backed off a few paces, its eyes never leaving mine. Blood dripped from my leg, staining the rocks beneath me. The bear sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring as it seemed to reconsider. Then, with a low growl, it turned and disappeared into the trees. I lay there for a long moment, gasping for air, the pain in my leg throbbing with every heartbeat. I tried to push myself up, but my vision blurred, and I felt my strength fading. The bear was gone, but the fear, the raw terror, was still with me. I had no choice but to make it back, to find help, and to make sure no one else would face the same fate. But as I struggled to my feet, I knew this was only the beginning. Pain, raw, jagged pain. It ripped through me, sending a shockwave of fire through my leg as I struggled to move. My breath came in shallow gasps, my body trembling from the shock of the attack. The world around me spun and I couldn't focus. All I could feel was the weight of the grizzly's jaws, the immense pressure as it had clamped down on my calf, pulling me with terrifying ease. My leg felt like it was on fire, but it was cold too, as though the blood that had drained from me was turning to ice. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs felt like dead weight. I could barely keep my eyes open, but I knew I had to move. I had to get away. The bear could come back. I couldn't stay here. With trembling hands, I reached down to feel my leg, wincing as my fingers brushed against the wound. The skin was torn open, the flesh mangled and bruised. Blood seeped between my fingers, hot and sticky. I tried to hold the wound, applying pressure, but the pain was unbearable and my head spun. "Come on, Jack," I whispered to myself, voice shaky. "You've got to move." I managed to push myself onto my elbows, my chest heaving with effort. The river was still there, its currents flowing calmly, mocking me with its quiet, unfeeling serenity. But I couldn't think about the river now. I had to get to safety, to help. I needed to survive. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but all I could focus on was the bear. The way it had come out of the trees, silent and terrifying. It hadn't hesitated for a moment. It had charged, and when it had bitten me, I had thought I was done for. "God, what the hell happened?" I muttered, my voice strained. "Why didn't it just leave me alone?" I looked around, my vision blurry, and saw the dark line of trees where the bear had disappeared. My pulse quickened. What if it came back? What if it was still nearby, waiting for me to get weak, to show a sign of vulnerability? I couldn't stay here any longer. I pushed myself onto my knees, the pain in my leg making it feel like my entire body was on fire. My head swam as I tried to stand, but the world tilted and I nearly collapsed again. I gripped a nearby rock for support, taking a moment to breathe through the nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. It was then that I heard the crack of a branch. I froze. My blood ran cold. The bear was back. Slowly I turned my head toward the sound, eyes scanning the trees, but all I could see were the dark shadows and the swirling mist that had settled over the river. The air was thick, oppressive, and I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. "Please don't come back," I whispered, barely able to breathe. The sound of the branch snapping again sent a wave of panic through me. It was too close. The bear was too close. I could hear its heavy breathing, each intake of air, like a threat, a promise that it wasn't done with me yet. I gritted my teeth and tried to stand again, this time pushing myself up with everything I had. My legs screamed in protest, but I ignored it. I had no choice. I had to get away. I staggered forward, my steps uneven as I limped along the riverbank. But the pain was overwhelming, and my strength was fading fast. My vision blurred again, and I stumbled, nearly falling face first into the rocks. I caught myself just in time, using my arms to push myself upright. "Just keep going," I whispered to myself. "Keep moving. Just keep moving." I made it another few steps, but my body was betraying me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest tight with the effort. My leg was useless, and every step sent fresh waves of pain through me. I couldn't keep going, but then I heard the bear again, closer now. It was coming for me. I turned, frantic, and saw it, the massive form of the grizzly emerging from the trees. Its dark eyes locked onto mine. My heart stopped in my chest as I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. The bear's growl rumbled through the air, deep and primal, and I knew that it wasn't just curious anymore. It was coming for me. "No, no, no," I gasped, shaking my head. "Not again, not like this." I raised my hands, trying to look bigger, trying to appear threatening, but I knew it was pointless. The bear didn't care. It didn't care about my fear, about my struggle to survive. It was a predator, and I was just prey. The bear took a step forward, its massive paws crushing the gravel beneath it. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Every movement felt like I was dragging myself through molasses, slow and agonizing. I couldn't run, I couldn't escape. The bear's growl grew louder, and I realized, too late, that it was closing the gap between us. It lunged at me with terrifying speed. Instinct took over. I reached for the bear spray, but my hands were shaking too badly. I fumbled with the canister, trying to get it in position, but before I could use it, the bear was on me. Its claws slashed at my arms, and the pain was so intense that I couldn't even scream. The force of the attack knocked me off balance, sending me sprawling backward onto the rocks. My head hit the ground with a sickening thud, and everything went blurry. I couldn't focus, I couldn't think. All I could feel was the bear's weight on top of me, its hot breath in my face, and the crushing, bone-jarring pain that coursed through my body. But then, as quickly as it had attacked, the bear released me. I lay there, gasping for air, too stunned to move. Blood was pouring from my wounds, and I could barely breathe. The bear was stepping back, its head low, eyes fixed on me as if deciding whether to finish me off or leave me to die slowly. It took another step back and then turned, disappearing into the trees. The sound of its footsteps faded, leaving only the rush of the river and the pounding of my heart. I was alone. I lay there, unable to move, unable to do anything but listen to the silence that had descended. The world around me seemed distant, muffled, as though I were drifting in and out of consciousness. The pain in my leg was unbearable, and I could feel the blood still flowing, soaking my clothes. But I couldn't find the strength to move, to get up. I was alive, but barely. I didn't know how long I lay there, the pain and the shock making it hard to keep track of time. But eventually I forced myself to push up onto my elbows, the world spinning around me. I had to get out of here, I had to find help. With a groan, I forced myself to my feet, my vision blurring once again. The bear might be gone, but the real fight was just beginning. I couldn't believe I was still alive. The pain in my leg was relentless, gnawing at me like 1,000 burning needles, but somehow I had managed to stand. My vision was fuzzy, the world spinning around me as if everything was underwater. I knew I shouldn't be moving, knew I should have stayed still, kept my head down, waited for help, but there was no time for that. The bear might return at any moment, and if it did, I needed to be ready. I stumbled away from the riverbank, my legs like jelly beneath me. Every step felt like a war against my own body. My calf was still bleeding, the wound raw and deep, and I could feel the blood soaking through my pants, dripping down to my boot. But I couldn't stop. Not now. With each step, I struggled to push back the panic that clawed at my chest. I had to focus. I had to keep moving. The last thing I wanted was to die alone out here, in the middle of nowhere, at the mercy of the very wilderness I had always loved. I limped forward, my eyes darting from the trees to the ground, trying to keep my balance. The pain was almost too much to handle, but I gritted my teeth and pushed through it. I had no choice. My pack was somewhere back by the river, but there was no way I was going back for it. I'd had enough of that spot, enough of the bear. I needed to get to the ranger station, get some medical help, get away from this nightmare. My breath came in short, shallow bursts as I staggered along the trail. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this vulnerable, this exposed. Every crack of a twig underfoot, every rustle of leaves in the distance sent my heart racing. What if the bear was still out there? What if it was following me, stalking me like prey? I tried to push those thoughts away, tried to focus on the path ahead. There was no use in worrying about things I couldn't control. I had to survive. And the only way to do that was to keep moving, keep putting one foot in front of the other. But the pain in my leg was starting to catch up with me. The blood loss was making my head swim, and I felt weak, like I was being drained of energy with every passing second. The nausea was rising again, and I could feel my stomach churn. I had to sit down, if only for a minute, just long enough to catch my breath. I stumbled off the trail and collapsed onto a large boulder, gasping for air. My legs screamed in agony, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the pain. But it wouldn't stop. The world was spinning, and every time I tried to focus, I felt myself slipping further away. "Focus, Jack," I muttered to myself, my voice shaking. "Focus. You're not dead yet." I fumbled for my pack, which was lying a few feet away on the ground, and pulled out the water bottle. My hands were shaking too badly to unscrew the cap properly, but I managed to take a few shaky sips. The cool water burned in my throat, but it helped clear my mind, at least for a moment. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The forest was still, the trees towering over me like silent sentinels. There was no sign of the bear, no movement in the shadows, but I knew it was still out there, somewhere, watching me. My breathing was slow now, more controlled. I had to keep going, I told myself. I couldn't stop, not now. The ranger station was too far, but the road wasn't much farther. I could make it. I stood again, leaning heavily on a nearby tree for support. My leg was on fire, but it was either this or die out here alone. I took one last look at the spot where I had collapsed, and then I forced myself to keep moving. With each step, the world seemed to tilt more and more, my vision narrowing and blurring as my body struggled to keep up. The pain in my leg was a constant searing reminder of how close I had come to death, but I pushed through it one step after another. My foot slipped a few times on the uneven trail, but I managed to catch myself. The last thing I needed now was to fall and lose what little strength I had left. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. It was hard to tell with the haze of exhaustion and pain clouding my mind. My pace slowed, each step becoming harder than the last. I had to rest again just for a moment, but I couldn't afford to. The bear could still be nearby, and I didn't want to give it any more of a chance than I had to. I heard something then, a rustling in the underbrush followed by the snap of a branch. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze, every muscle in my body, locking up as I strained to listen. It was the bear, it had to be. I looked around frantically, but there was nowhere to hide, no cover. The trail was open, the forest stretching endlessly in front of me. I was exposed. I looked down at my leg, the blood soaking through my pant leg. I was slowing down. It was only a matter of time before the bear caught up to me. My body was betraying me, and I knew it. I had to make a choice. Either I kept running, if you could call it running, or I stopped and prepared for the worst. There wasn't any other option. I staggered forward again, my breath coming in desperate gasps. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept going. I wasn't going to die here, not like this, not in the middle of nowhere with no one to help. I wasn't going to give that bear the satisfaction. As I pushed myself forward, the rustling sound grew louder, but I couldn't afford to stop. I had to make it to the road to the ranger station. I had to get out of here. I limped down the path, pushing through the pain, fighting to keep my balance. My body felt like it was on fire, and I knew I couldn't last much longer. But I kept moving, putting one foot in front of the other, and then, just as I thought I couldn't go another step, I saw it. The road. It was just ahead, maybe 50 yards or so. My heart surged with hope. I could make it, I could. The ground beneath my feet shifted, I slipped, and then everything went black. I woke up to the feeling of cold steel pressing against my back. My head ached like someone had taken a hammer to it, and my leg throbbed painfully with every shallow breath I took. For a moment I thought I was still in the forest, still stumbling down that endless trail towards salvation. But the harsh, sterile scent of antiseptic filled my nostrils, and the familiar hum of machines pulsed in my ears. I was in a hospital, I groaned, lifting my hand to my forehead, only to find that it was wrapped in a thick bandage. My vision was blurry, but I could make out the sterile white walls of a room, the quiet beep of a heart monitor beside me. My mind raced, trying to piece together the events that had led me here. The bear, my leg, the blood, the pain. I remembered slipping, falling, and then nothing. "You're awake," a voice said, calm but urgent. I turned my head and blinked, trying to focus on the figure standing near the door. A woman in scrubs, probably a nurse, her face a mixture of concern and professionalism. She smiled faintly when she saw my eyes meet hers. "You took a pretty bad spill out there, Jack. How are you feeling?" I swallowed, my throat dry. My mouth tasted like dust and the raw taste of blood still lingered. I tried to speak, but only a croak escaped my lips. I cleared my throat and tried again. How long was I out?" "About 6 hours," she said, moving toward the side of the bed to check the IV that was hooked into my arm. "You were found just off the trail by a couple of hikers who were passing by. They called it in, and we got to you as quickly as we could. Your leg was in bad shape and you had some head trauma, but you're stable now." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to process the information. Hikers. That was a stroke of luck. I had no idea how I had gotten so far. It felt like the entire ordeal had stretched on for days, not hours. "What happened to the bear?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. The nurse hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking down to my leg, still heavily bandaged. "I can't say for certain. We haven't heard anything from the rangers, but given the injuries you sustained, it sounds like you were attacked by a grizzly. It's rare, but it happens." I nodded slowly. My body felt like it was still in a fog, like I was floating above myself, watching the events unfold. "It came so close," I murmured, more to myself than to the nurse. I thought I was going to die out there." The nurse reached over and gently placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch soft but reassuring. "You're lucky, Jack. You're lucky you made it out at all." Her words should have comforted me, but instead they only brought more fear. The bear had been that close to finishing the job. If I hadn't made it to the road when I did, if those hikers hadn't found me, I didn't want to think about what might have happened. Where's the truck?" I asked, my thoughts shifting to the vehicle I'd left behind, parked by the river. The nurse glanced up from her task, her expression softening. "It's safe. The rangers picked it up after we brought you in. It's at the station. Don't worry about it for now. We'll get you discharged once you're stable." I didn't want to worry about the truck. It didn't matter. I didn't want to worry about anything except getting out of here, getting back to something that felt normal. The world outside these sterile walls felt distant, unreal, and I wasn't sure I could face it again just yet. The door creaked open and another figure stepped inside. This time it was a man, a ranger judging by his uniform. His expression was serious but not unfriendly. He had a weathered face, the kind of face that had seen its share of harsh winters and long days in the wild. "Jack Simmons?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yeah," I replied, my voice still weak. "That's me." The ranger took a step closer, a clipboard in hand. He glanced at the nurse, who nodded and stepped back, giving us some privacy. He looked down at the paper, then back at me, his eyes steady. "I'm Ranger Doug Matthews," he said. "I'm the one who got the call about your incident. You were pretty lucky, man. We're just glad we were able to get to you in time." "I'm lucky?" I laughed bitterly, the sound rough in my throat. "I was lucky to survive a bear attack. I'm not feeling that lucky right now." Matthews didn't flinch at my tone. "I get it. It's a lot to process. The thing is, we've been getting reports of that same bear over the past few days. It's been acting unusually aggressive, not just around people, but even toward other animals. It's definitely a grizzly, but something's off about it. We've sent out a couple of teams to track it, but it's been elusive. They haven't found it yet." I stared at him, the weight of his words settling over me like a cold, heavy blanket. "What do you mean, something's off? Is the bear sick or something?" "Could be," Matthews said. "We're not sure yet, but it's possible." A bear acting like this, especially one as large as this one seems to be, could be dealing with something that's affecting its behavior. Could be a disease, or maybe it's just desperate for food. But whatever it is, it's dangerous, and it's not something we can take lightly. Does that mean it could come back? I asked, my voice tight with fear. Come back for me? Matthew studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I don't want to scare you, Jack, but yeah, it could. The thing is, we don't know where the bear went after the incident. It's been a few hours since we've heard anything, and there's no telling if it'll return to the area. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The thought of that massive beast coming back for me, I didn't think I could survive it a second time. You've been through a hell of an ordeal, Matthews continued, his voice softer now. But the Rangers are doing everything they can to track this bear down. In the meantime, I'm going to advise you to stay out of the wilderness for a while, at least until we know more. I nodded, unable to speak. The weight of his words pressed down on me. It wasn't just the bear anymore. It was the fear of it coming back, of what might happen next. My world had been turned upside down in just a matter of hours, and now I had to try and make sense of it all. Thank you, I said finally, my voice barely a whisper, for everything. Matthews gave me a brief nod. Stay safe, Jack, we'll be in touch. Just focus on getting better for now. As he turned to leave, I sank back into the pillows, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I wasn't sure when I'd be ready to go back into the wild, or even if I ever would. But for now, all I could do was heal and try to make sense of the nightmare I had barely survived. The days following my hospitalization were a blur of pain, frustration, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. The nurses came in and out, checking my vitals, adjusting the IV drip, and making sure I was as comfortable as possible. But nothing could erase the memory of that bear, the sight of its massive form charging toward me, the feeling of its jaws sinking into my flesh. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me with nothing but the raw, gnawing ache in my leg and the dread that the bear might return. By the time the doctor walked in that morning, I had managed to sit up in bed for the first time without feeling like I might pass out. My leg was still wrapped in bandages, and the wound ached with every movement, but at least the dizziness had started to fade. Good morning, Mr. Simmons, the doctor said with a soft smile. He was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a face that looked like it had seen more than a few rough days. His name tag read Dr. Harris. Morning, I muttered, my voice still rough from the strain of the last few days. How are we feeling today? He asked as he checked the chart at the end of my bed. Like I got mauled by a grizzly, I replied, trying to keep the sarcasm in check. He chuckled lightly, his expression sympathetic. Well, you did, but you're doing better than most would be in your situation. Your vitals are stable, and the wound is healing well. You've got some pretty serious bruising and a lot of swelling, but you should be able to walk again in a few weeks, assuming there's no infection. I nodded, still trying to wrap my head around the fact that I had survived. I'm lucky to be alive. You are, Dr. Harris agreed, flipping through the chart. But I think you're also underestimating how much your body has been through. The blood loss, the trauma to your leg, you're going to need some time to fully recover. But you're tough. I think you'll make it. The praise didn't feel like much. I didn't feel tough. I felt broken, weak. A part of me had thought I'd be able to walk out of here within a couple of days, like it was just another injury. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that what I'd gone through wasn't just a physical battle. The fear, the helplessness, it wasn't something you could shake off that easily. He'll need a follow-up appointment in a few weeks, but for now you're free to go home, Dr. Harris said. We'll keep you on antibiotics for a little longer, just to make sure there's no infection in that leg. And I'd advise you to take it easy for a while. No hiking, no long walks, just rest. I looked up at him, trying to make sense of his words. So that's it? I just go home, lay around for a few weeks and wait? For the most part, yes, he said with a nod. Rest, eat well, and let your body do its work. That leg's going to need time to heal, and you don't want to rush it. You've got a good shot at making a full recovery. But don't expect to be back out there anytime soon. I nodded, though part of me wanted to argue. I'd always prided myself on being self-reliant, on getting back into the swing of things as soon as possible. but the doctor's words hit. Home? I wasn't invincible. My body had been through something I couldn't just brush off. "Do you think I should report this to anyone?" I asked after a long pause. "I mean the bear attack. Shouldn't the Rangers do something about it?" Dr. Harris paused, looking at me with a thoughtful expression. "I believe they've been notified and we've documented your injuries here. The Rangers are aware of the bear and they've been working to track it down. But at this point, I don't think there's much else you need to do. You've survived and now it's about taking care of yourself." The words felt hollow. I had done everything I could to survive, but the idea of the bear still being out there, maybe still hunting, gnawed at me. It was hard to shake the feeling that nothing had really been resolved. I don't know if I can go back out there," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "That place, the river, it feels like it's haunted now." Dr. Harris nodded understandingly. "It's perfectly normal to feel that way after an experience like yours. The wilderness is a beautiful place, but it can also be dangerous. And when you're faced with that kind of threat, it changes how you see things. Take your time. There's no rush to go back." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't. The idea of returning to the same spot, of confronting the place where I had nearly lost everything, felt impossible. The river, the trees, the smell of the earth, everything felt like it was tainted now. How could I return to that peace when the memory of the attack was burned so deeply into my mind? "Thanks, Dr. Harris," I said, trying to push those thoughts aside. "I appreciate everything. I'll do my best to take it easy." "That's the spirit," he said with a smile. "Take care of yourself, Jack. We'll see you in a couple of weeks for a follow-up. In the meantime, just keep resting." As Dr. Harris left the room, I lay back against the pillows, trying to process what had just happened. My body was healing, but my mind felt shattered. The bear, the fear, the blood. It was all still so real, like it had happened just a few minutes ago. I thought about the wilderness, about the river. The idea of never returning seemed impossible. It had been my refuge for so long, my escape. But now I wasn't sure if I would ever feel safe there again. I glanced toward the window, watching as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the distant hills. The world outside was calm, peaceful, but inside me, everything was unsettled. I didn't know when or if I'd return to the place that had always been my sanctuary, but one thing was for sure. I would never forget the terror of that day and the grizzly that had nearly taken everything from me. The days after. My release from the hospital bled into one another, a blur of restless nights and long aching days. My leg was improving slowly but surely, and the pain had become a dull, constant throb rather than the sharp, unbearable sensation it had been. The swelling had gone down, and I was finally able to walk with a crutch, though it still hurt to put weight on it. The doctor had been right, though. Healing would take time, more time than I had originally anticipated. I spent my days at home, staring at the walls, thinking about the attack. The worst part was how it kept playing in my mind, over and over, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I'd hear the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, and for a moment I'd freeze, expecting to see the massive form of the bear emerge from the trees again. It was irrational, but it didn't stop me from reliving the moment when it had charged toward me, its jaws wide, the world collapsing around me as I struggled to escape. One afternoon, nearly a week after the attack, I decided I had to face it. I couldn't keep hiding from the memories, from the fear. I needed to go back to the river, to the place where everything had gone wrong. Maybe, just maybe, confronting it would help me move on. I hadn't told anyone about my decision. My friends, my family, they all thought I was crazy to even consider going back out there, especially after everything I'd been through. But they didn't understand. The river had always been my sanctuary. It was where I went to escape, to clear my head. If I could return there, maybe I could reclaim a piece of that peace. The drive to the Kenai River was long, stretching on, as I passed through familiar landscapes, but nothing felt familiar anymore. The world outside the truck window looked the same as it always had: lush forests, winding roads, and the distant mountains. But inside me, everything had changed. I arrived at the river just after noon. the sun high in the sky and the air still crisp from the early morning chill. My leg was sore from the long drive, but I forced myself to get out of the truck. The crutch thudded against the gravel as I made my way toward the bank, each step deliberate, as though walking too fast would summon the memories back too soon. The river was calm as always, its surface rippling gently as it wound through the valley. I stopped for a moment, just watching the water, trying to find some of that tranquility I used to feel here. The trees stood tall and quiet, their shadows stretching long across the land. The world was still, peaceful, and for a moment I thought I could convince myself that nothing had changed. But then I heard it, the snap of a branch, sharp and deliberate. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around, my pulse racing. My grip tightened on the crutch and my breath caught in my throat. "Just the wind," I whispered, but my voice didn't sound convincing even to me. My hands trembled as I scanned the tree line, but nothing moved. The trees were still, the air was still. I waited, heart hammering in my chest, for what felt like an eternity. But there was no sign of the bear, no movement from the shadows. Maybe it had been nothing. Maybe I was just paranoid. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "You're not that guy," I muttered to myself. "You're not going to let this place win." I limped toward the edge of the river, my crutch digging into the earth with every step. The pain in my leg was sharp, but I pushed through it, determined to make it to the spot where I had first been attacked. I couldn't keep avoiding it. I needed to face it head-on. When I finally reached the bend where it had happened, I stopped, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This was the place, the exact spot where the bear had emerged from the trees. I could almost see it in my mind, the massive shape stepping out. From the shadows, its eyes locked onto mine. The memory hit me like a punch to the stomach, and I swayed slightly, feeling lightheaded. I placed my hand on the nearest tree, steadying myself. The air was thick with the scent of earth and pine, and the sound of the river filled the silence around me. But inside, everything was still. "Get a grip, Jack," I muttered under my breath. "It's over. You're here. You're alive." But my words felt hollow. They didn't reach the part of me that still feared the bear, the part of me that still thought it could come back at any moment. A gust of wind swept through the trees, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard something, a low growl, faint, but unmistakable. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Nothing, I was alone. The realization hit me like a wave. It wasn't the bear I was afraid of anymore. It was the fear of returning to that place, of confronting what had happened. The attack, the helplessness, the blood, it all felt so raw and real, like it had just happened. The memory had lodged itself in me, and every step I took felt like it was pulling me further into that moment. But I had to let it go, I had to. The bear was gone, the danger was over, I had survived. I took a shaky breath and lowered my crutch, letting it rest against the ground. I stepped forward, closer to the water, closer to the spot where everything had almost ended. I let the quiet of the river wash over me, let the gentle flow of the water soothe the storm inside me. "Maybe it's not over," I said aloud, my voice low. "Maybe it never really is." But as the river flowed before me, I realized something. The bear, the attack, the terror, it was just part of my story now. I couldn't change what had happened, and I couldn't erase the fear that still lingered. But I could choose to move forward. I could choose to keep walking. I limped back to the truck, my heart still racing, but not with the same frantic